Hey fam, so today I'm going to talk about one of the antique finds. It's very interesting. It's a Swedish, it's like an 1800s era, it's a machete style belt sword. This was issued to Swedish mariners and some other soldiers alike, and you can actually see all the file work and the rough file work there on the front. It's kind of interesting. You might not be able to see it. There you go. It's a very interesting blade. And it actually had some of the original kind of gunk and oil on it. You see it's actually not sharpened. So it was never really properly used. They would issue them like this, and then before combat they would actually put a sharp edge on there. And I think it's quite interesting how it's sort of reminiscent of a parang. It's tempting to put my own edge on there, but I won't. Quite thick. And the most interesting feature to me, of course, is the handle. You know, an old friend of mine said, you know, when you think about a knife, you gotta, you know, the handle is like 90% of the importance of a knife, because that's where you hold it. That's where the handle is gonna be used more than the actual blade itself, if you think about it. And one of the most interesting things about this construction, I've taken a lot of influence from this type of design. It's got a tapered full tang, and it's not really that tapered. It has some tapering on the blade spine, but the handle tang is completely tapered. And here are some key features that I talk about all the time. It's this ring, and the ring goes around the metal from the belly and the bottom of the tang. It's very important to prevent splitting of the wood. And if you look at the rivets, these are riveted on and flushed down. So there are this brass eyelet goes around, and they hammered it down and then finished it all up and put some really thick lacquer on there. And then there's a lanyard hole. So if you think about it, this is actually very modern. The shape is a little odd, but it fits very nicely in the hand. It's very smooth, and it sits very well. This type of handle construction, you just forge over the eye of an anvil. You literally you have your piece of metal, and you just smack it on the top and around the horn of the anvil, and then you create that shape. I've done that with a couple bowies, and it's a very nice handle. The next step to make it sort of modernized from like a cold steel perspective is to put a finger groove there and a finger groove there, and essentially it's a modern handle. But lanyard hole, couple pins. 3 is very important. You don't want to have 2, because if you have just 2, what happens is the middle will split. If you bend the metal, if you bend the tang, it'll force one side to pop off, essentially. But that ring is really what's important, and they must have slid it over, forced it down there, and then put the scales on. The guard is a little bit wobbly, but I guess that was kind of natural in those days. They might not have cared so much for it. Then you got very tall shoulders on the ricasso side. So overall, an extremely strong construction, very strong. And I've been trying to mimic this using frame scales. I haven't yet done it so that I have a ring over the front of a full tang, but that's super important if you have a guard, and it's super important if you have wood, some kind of raw material as your handle. And as you can see, this is, you know, a couple hundred years old. It might even be older than that Husqvarna, and that's from 1871 or something. So it's actually like a couple years older than the Sparks. Sorry, the Sharps. I've been playing a little hunt. So it feels very light in the hand, actually. This feels very well made. Although when you swing it around, it starts to feel a little kind of unbalanced. So definitely like a production style blade. And I thought I would just throw that out there, because here I'll show you guys these numbers. I don't really know what they mean. We have A and B.H, sorry. let's see, A&E.H. So I'm not sure which manufacturer that is. And then, oh, T.3 number 1611. So that might be the serial number, 1611. And then here on the top we have GW and IZ4 or something. Hard to say this, they're kind of stamped on top of each other. Brass fittings, brass ring, very strong construction. And I think overall super interesting thing to look at. I have collected antique blades like this to look at, and one thing that they do have a lot in common is this ring at the front, whether it's a cutlass or a saber of some kind. There's sort of a transitional period where, especially with marine blades, where they go away from this and then they just have a fully cast brass handle. And I'm sure you've seen that a lot on especially bayonets from the World War I era. So that was sort of the transition area. And even before that, for 50 something odd years, they just cast the handle straight out of brass. It was like the injection molding of the day. And brass, you know, it's quite I guess you could say rust resistant in that sense. But this could be used for fighting. So it was a mix between a utilitarian tool and a fighting tool. But as from what I understand, they weren't actually picked up or used that much, and it's probably because it's a large blade, relatively heavy, and at an era where rifles had a higher rate of repeatability. So you could fire more than a couple rounds a minute, I guess you could say. There was, of course, during the periods where everything was, muzzle loaded, black powder, paper cartridges, and things were slow. You needed larger blades because you'd fire and then pull out your sword or whatever you had and charge. So this is a state issue. This is something that was issued by the Swedish state, the kingdom, I guess it was at the time. So of course it's going to be standardized and high quality. And I'd love to find one that's in a more terrible condition so that I could put an edge on it and play around with it. But overall, very nice choke up. You can even hold it back here for sort of a pistol grip for defense. But it's a very interesting thing, and I think it's again another example of a ring being used at the front of a handle to prevent splitting in the wood. And I think this is overall probably the strongest construction, because you don't have this, the metal is not trying to force its way out through the wood. It's two scales with a ring. I think personally, just two scales alone without the ring, and you get a split down the middle here. And I have a lot of examples of that, but they're not right here inside. But you'll see in a lot of older swords, they'll have a rat tail, a ring, and there's a split, or they have a full tang, no ring, like certain machetes that are much more modern. I have actually a machete in the garage I could show you guys in another episode where you can see the splitting occur from between the pins. So it's a very interesting, it's nice to look at because you see you see a lot of modern things. You see what's considered modern and what's considered tactical and what's considered appealing in a modern design was already pretty much standard and considered highest level quality by kingdoms a couple hundred years ago. So I think it's overall a very beautiful blade and definitely quite useful. It doesn't look like it was intended to be sharpened here. It looks like this is the only area here where it's supposed to be sharpened. Very interesting, because that's again reminiscent of a lot of parangs. So it's an interesting sort of sword, blade, machete, defensive tool mashup. And the main reason I'm showing it is because I like to, show these older products and what people had figured out back then and what they considered, minimum viable. And here we have a lot of evidence of very modern thinking, what we consider modern thinking, And another interesting thing is you see how flush that ring is to the wood. The wood is carved so that it fits under the ring, and there's no ledge here. So they put a lot of effort into this design, and they put a lot of work into it. It's got the rivets, it's got the ring, it's full tang. This is probably as strong as it's gonna get in terms of strength. And you can see the on top here where it's on top of the metal. So here there's a ledge, but not on the sides. Here it's smooth. Here there's a step. So this is precisely the type of construction that I've been thinking of replicating. But of course, the one downside is you will get a wobbly, it will be slightly wobbly, the guard here, and the reason for that is because you're not peening the handle in place, you're not screwing the pommel into place, you're not forcing it down on top of the shoulder, which is why I think the frame rat tails are great, because you can actually get that construction. But then again, of course, at the end of the day, this is how much will this actually bother somebody, But in many ways, that's a wobbly guard out of the box, because this is fresh, unused. Again, like I said, they weren't really used that much. I don't think Sweden really engaged in enough military or warfare activity to actually activate these into proper usage on the battlefield. But they served a role, and it's a pretty awesome blade. There's a lot of these in Finland and in Scandinavia. You go to gun shows and you'll see there's always a few of these laying around, and they're all in pretty much similar condition. Albeit the one thing missing is, you see where here it's broken off, that would be your belt clip. And that seems to have broken off on many of them, or maybe they were deliberately taken off. That's also another potential. That's also what may have also happened, is that they deliberately took those rings off for different types of storage. It fits in quite well. I mean, this is tight as it's gonna get, and it's not too tight, it's not too loose. Again, not the best kind of fit up, but you can see that there's certain things that they focused on that they thought were important in the quality of a blade. Let's see, no, it doesn't go that way, it goes this way. And then there's other things where they just whatevered it, and that kind of fit here, that's like a whatever. Why would that matter? Same with the guard being loose. I mean, it's not loose, it's just a tiny little bit wobbly. But the main thing, of course, is ensuring that this handle lasts. And that's why they put that ring there. So there's another example. There's another example of an antique blade that I like to look at and refer to for some design aspects of what I'm going through. And you can see, very interesting how the ledge goes up there to the top of the guard and the bottom here. So they really did a very large ricasso there to stop that guard from going forward. It's possible that it was tight when it was first made, and the wood kind of shrunk over time, which allowed this to happen. And what we see in World War One, for example, and sort of that transitional period of time, is that they would rivet the guards in place. So the guards were thicker, and they would actually drill a hole through the whole thing and rivet it in place. But this is just a sheet, basically, that's been bent and fitted on. So definitely something that I would like to play around with and try out. Fitting a ring at the front of a full tang. I've done it with frame handles, so we have an example here. So I'll be using this one a lot for just basically like this. And if this was a full tang, essentially, and you could technically do that because the shoulder here, I think, is actually wider than the pommel there, so you would slide it over and then put your ring, and there you go. So it's kind of a nice little blade there, although it's a little heavy. The moose antler scales are very dense and very heavy. So I I think one of the best places to really look for ideas in terms of knife making, and I guess you could say tool making, is to look at sort of this 18th century era swords and knives, sort of that transition between guns with higher rates of fire and guns with no rate of fire. So basically the era where we're transitioning from, you know, paper cartridges, percussion caps, flintlock, into more like basically, actually, like, yeah, later versions of paper cartridges and early cartridges that you know, breech loading rifles and things like that. This is probably around the similar time frame, maybe a little later than a lot of the Bowie knives that we see from Sheffield to America. And just a royal blade. This is from the Swedish. One reason why they didn't sharpen these right beforehand, the reason they actually left them dull and they would only sharpen before combat, is because they would train with these, and so by leaving them dull as is and just putting a false edge like this, they could actually practice in the barracks and train with the swords, at least lightly. I'm sure they had some blades that were much more like, here are your training blades, don't touch those blades over there, those are, you know, just in case we go to war. So the more primo stuff they kind of left untouched, and then they had sort of basic versions that they because you can see some kinks actually all over the blade, and you can see that blades have impacted this but they're not deep impacts, they're not deep kinks. For example, here you can see some kink, and that's a very similar type of kink geometry to the blade profile, and it's not flat, this is rounded, the very edge. So very interesting to kind of peer into that and look into that, and I think it's overall a really cool blade. And if this was sharp, it would be definitely a viable modern, you know, you could use this still today, and it would be as good as the day it came out in the of its workshop. I mean, everything is solid, everything feels brand new on there, relatively unused. This is also something that I've seen a lot, this type of damage on handles right in the middle, where somebody used the handle for smacking into something. So I think that's quite interesting to see, because it goes to show that many utility knives, bayonets especially, have been used as hammers like this, and that might be a consideration for something to do on the pommel, maybe on the bottom or something, where you have a little metal exposed so you can actually use it as a hammer. But that's, you know, that's for just, you know, fantasy blades, I guess you could say. I don't know why you would do it with the handle here like that when you could just use the side of the blade. But it's also possible because this is on the inside, so it's on the face that's on against you, that this is, you know, during some kind of dress rehearsals or some kind of military ceremonial you know, rehearsals or something like that, or some kind of active military training where these were partaken in, that this was pushed up against some kind of belt or some kind of protrusion or metallic system that was on strapped onto the belt, and that's most likely probably where it came from. Although these are pretty sharp little impacts, but yeah, maybe some kind of metal box, some kind of metal corner from something on the belt. But again, a nice, very interesting look at the overall construction that I think you knife makers out there would be really interested to try out, because I'm pushing this ring at the front of the handle so hard, and it's not difficult to do. You know, there's a lot of ways you can do it, you just have to be creative. This is really an awesome feeling blade, just really nice. You can see in my hand, you can see very easily through videos when blades fit good in somebody's hand. You got to remember that the people back then were a bit stronger, than we are today. They had much higher grip strength. You know, a lot of these people grew up on farms, you know, playing around with farming implements all day, and so there was generally like, it's a lot of the tools were slightly heavier. You know, a modern spade is much lighter than a spade from that era. So the people had, you know, they did allow themselves, even the guns themselves. I mean, that one up there is heavy compared to an AR-15. That thing's a brick. So you know, and that translates to general overall stronger people. So they were allowed to you know, for them this would have been very, very, very light. It is quite light, but it's until you start to swing around you kind of feel like, yeah, this is like a manufactured thing. It's a little bit like some of the cold steel larger knives. They feel great, they swing great and everything, but then after a while you kind of feel like, yeah, it's not like 100% refined. It's pretty close, but you do feel that imbalance a little bit after a while. So very cool stuff, guys, and just another example of an antique blade with high degree of construction that we should definitely look at and take examples from and learn from and copy. So there it is, guys, and if you want to support the channel, you can go on my website and pick yourself up a HMK scalpel. It's my most popular product. Beautiful little blade, and I'll see you guys later.